Welcome to the Edge You Magic New Educator podcast, the go-to show for supporting new educators navigating the exciting journey from campus to the classroom. Join your host, Dr. Sam Fessich, for a blend of inspiration, advice, and practical strategies, one cup of coffee at a time.
I'm Anne, co-host of Transparency in Teaching, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com. Hello, EduMagicians, and welcome back to another episode of the EduMagic podcast. My name is Dr. Sam Fessich, and today I am super pumped. We're talking all about AI with Priten Shah. He just came out with a book called AI and the Future of Education. Priten, welcome to the show.
I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so pumped to have you here. We know that AI is kind of new to education, especially for our pre-service teachers out there, just learning about what is it, how do we define it, what's the history, and we're going to break down all those types of things in today's show. And we're going to end with a few tools that teachers can use in their classroom using artificial intelligence. So let's start off with, how would you define artificial intelligence?
Yeah, there is so many different versions of the definition that float around. The one that we like to use for teachers is that it's an interdisciplinary field that seeks to create machines that can mimic human-like thinking. So the key part here is like, can we get machines to do the kinds of things that our brains can do, and how well can they do that? And that's where you kind of see different definitions of AI come about. Lots of debates about which stage of AI development we're at. But that's what everyone's kind of trying to figure out. Are we worse than humans, the same as humans, or better than humans when it comes to machine thinking? And everyone right now pretty much universally agrees that we're still the worse than humans category. And that's, weak AI is a term that's used for that. And then eventually we'll get to artificial general intelligence, which is that when it is comparable to human thinking. And then like the thing of sci-fi movies and all the fears is super intelligence, which is like when it can do better thinking than we can.
Okay. So that being said, with the super AI and the meeting human intelligence AI, maybe we shouldn't be using it to write our papers. It may or may not be doing a better job than we could do.
Yeah, it's a better job than who is probably the question at this point, because the technology is pretty good. But yeah, I think human oversight is still important. And we can talk a little bit about all those reasons as we keep going. But yeah, let's not have it universally write all our academic papers for us just yet.
Right. So we know that AI didn't just come out in 2022 with ChatGPT, which is a year ago with this recording in November.
Just about a year ago.
Yeah, it's crazy. It seems like AI is new, but we know that it really isn't. Would you mind walking us through a really brief history of AI and how that history relates to where we are, especially in education?
Yeah, so the history starts like around 70 years ago, which sounds like crazy for most people because exactly. Because it does sound like forever ago when things feel like it shifted overnight last fall. But you get like the first ideas of like, could we be interacting with a computer and even know that it's a computer, not a human? And that was the Turing test. And that starts out in 1950. The first time the term AI is coined is in 1956. So this is, a good chunk of time away. None of this is brand new. And then we start seeing some actual development of these systems. And so the late 90s, we see narrow AI systems. The narrow AI systems are trained at particular tasks. And so they might learn how to play chess. They might be really good at voice recognition. And so your Siri systems, Alexa, all of those are narrow AIs because they're really good at one particular thing. But anybody who's interacted with it knows that they do not mimic human thinking at all. And so that is their specialty. Google search, image search algorithms use some artificial intelligence. Your Netflix suggesting which next movie to watch uses artificial intelligence. And so there's there's spits and spatters of AI all throughout our lives already, but they're a very particular type. They're really focused on one particular type of task. And so what has caused the massive shift in the last year really is the accessibility of this AI technology and how many more tasks it can do. And those are two big key things. So even the kind of technology that came out last year, which is generative AI, which is very different than prior AI systems, because prior AI systems classify things. And so it takes an image and tells you whether it's a dog or a cat. But now AI can generate an image of a dog or a cat. And that's really where the generative AI era has started in artificial intelligence. And the second component that they did was made it really accessible and conversational. And so you don't need to be a developer to access it. You don't have to know how to use an API or an algorithm or write code a website. You can log in and chat the way you would like on like Facebook Messenger. And that's why I think we saw a huge uptake in how many people were using it really quickly because it became really easy. And that's why it seemed like things happened overnight, even though like GPT itself that had like earlier versions of their models that were around for a few years, but only developers were playing around with them in their, in their like local computers, like saying, oh, this is cool. Like, this is awesome. But like no one was actually using it.
So let's kind of move into there before we talk about benefits of AI. What are some things teachers need to be aware of when using artificial intelligence, like data and privacy, student data? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are so many real concerns here. And I think this is where I think folks have been really cautious about it. I think that's why when it initially came out, we saw a lot of the districts put out bans. And I think that caused like a wave of fear amongst teachers about approaching the technology. And I think those fears are reasonable. I think it's about making sure we can manage those fears so that we can actually embrace the technology and it's not going anywhere. And so figuring out how we can incorporate it in safer ways. And so I think you pointed out two key ones already. The data privacy is a really important one. So when we think about which tools we're accessing as teachers, but also which ones we allow our students to access, we really want to know what they're going to do with the data. And so this is one where I'm hoping for some more top-down regulation. I'm very skeptical that it's going to happen. If like the social media era has shown us everything, like the government does not catch up with the technology quickly enough. We're still debating about what kinds of regulations to put on echo chambers and social media. So I'm skeptical that we'll see massive, like actual actionable steps from the government. And so, but I am optimistic that consumer feedback is going to do something. And so this is where like OpenAI, when they initially, came out and even in like the winter of last year, they were storing data, using it to train their systems. There was no data privacy regulations on their end at all. But after like folks started approaching them and saying, hey, like we really can't be using this in an academic setting or in a corporate setting or in a healthcare setting, if they're not better regulations on your end and like promises you're making to us about data privacy. And so then they started deleting all data after 30 days if you like opt into it and things like that. And so you kind of want to make sure that whichever systems you're using are implementing some sort of safeguards like that. The other is the basic media literacy that we always teach students about what information to put on, their social media profiles, what information to put on a blog post somewhere, what, all those media literacy ideas still stand. And so we want to make sure that students aren't putting too much personal information when they're interacting with chatbots. And we ourselves are not putting too much information about students. Like you can get a lot done with these machines without having to name a student or give any personal identifiable information to the systems. And so there's safeguards that we can do. There's safeguards we're hoping that the AI companies themselves will implement. But there's also other major concerns. And so there's concern about bias. These systems are trained on human data, and we as a society are extremely biased in a multitude of different ways. And all of those will start showing up in the output that it produces. And so early image generators are one of the examples that we have is if you type in a CEO sitting at a desk, you see pictures of all white men. And that's just our it was just non-purposeful, very easy, but it just shows how much those biases are ingrained. There's really good literature about when these AI algorithms are used for credit scores and they're used for figuring out who should get a housing loan, or even used in the judicial system, that the same racial and gender stereotypes that we often see with humans get replicated by these AI systems. And especially when we're thinking about incorporating them in an educational context, we want to be really careful about making sure that we both make sure that these systems have some safeguards in place, but we're educating our students about seeing those. And so I think that's another big part is developing a completely unbiased AI model might be an ideal dream of some developer out there. But I think educators can actually get students to recognize these biases and kind of do some work, making sure that they can work against them and kind of fix those biases. And so that's another concern that we want to definitely keep in mind. I think the other major thing to think about just is the misinformation campaigns. And I'll start the negative talk after that one, just so that we can also talk about some of the positives here. But the reality is we want to be careful about these things as we go into usage. And so I'm glad we're starting here. So one of the concerns is, when new technology comes out, the bad actors will try to figure out ways to use it in malicious ways. We saw that with social media and folks using it to try to create echo chambers and sway elections across the world, even in the United States. And now there's technology that can write really specific things that cater exactly to your political views and the rhetoric that you enjoy reading, create fake images that look like real interactions. My book has a picture of Mark Zuckerberg and President Obama dancing outside the White House. And I can't tell that it's not real, but it's not real. I use an AI system to generate the image. And that was a very, it was a fun, like, there's no political implications of that. Well, there might be in some domain, but there's not widespread political implications of that. But when you can make an image of like the Federal Reserve chair giving a talk about like the economy's going to tank tomorrow, right? Like those kinds of things, like getting students to be able to use this technology in ethical ways, so they're not doing that for cyberbullying. They're not doing that in, within their school systems, even to spread misinformation, but also be good consumers of information as we enter more complex election cycles because of the AI.
Yeah, I think that, being able to find those fakes or be aware, hey, these things exist, can just go right into our digital literacy curriculum, and starting with our little learners all the way up through our high schoolers, and talking about what are the implications when we use AI to create this content that really isn't great for society, and how can we fact check it? So maybe looking through and vetting the content. And that's what I tell my students, if you're going to use AI, okay, you can use it as a stepping stone or a way to get started, but don't just copy paste that lesson plan and say, hey, look, I wrote this awesome lesson plan, because the AI doesn't know your students, you do. So adding your own sprinkles to it, adding your own teacher joy to it is really important. So being able to spot, hey, this might not be true. Let me go ahead and fact check and vet that, because sometimes it even says on some of the AI platforms, this information might be biased or untrue, or AI might hallucinate sometimes and give you something not even related to what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, I think hallucination is a good one to just, and especially with the audience in mind, just thinking about like kinds of things we want to keep in mind that we're developing educational materials and preparing our students to interact with it. These AI models like can mimic AI-like thinking. And so that's like the mimic word is really key here. And that like they're not actually thinking about things. They don't actually hold knowledge the way that we humans hold knowledge. They don't do metacognitive thinking the way we teach our students to do metacognitive thinking about like, oh, am I thinking about this right? Is there a logical fallacy I'm using? Like, am I missing some information? Should I be asking more questions? It doesn't have those abilities built in. There are some prompt engineering things that folks say, oh, like if you tell it to do that, it'll do it. But it doesn't naturally do that at face, like when you ask it to do something from the get-go. And so all it's doing is it's a mathematical algorithm right now of like how likely words are to show up next to each other. That's it. Like that is the only understanding of the world it has. It has a very good understanding of how we talk and write and communicate as humans, but it doesn't know what we're communicating about. Like it doesn't know in any sense. And so it will make things up. So if it thinks that like a Google URL, like that normally shows YouTube videos about the Electoral College looks like a certain way, it will make up that URL and tell you here's a bunch of videos about like the Electoral College you can use with your students, but that link won't exist. And so, or like if you say, hey, like what's the latest book published by Priten in 2024 when January rolls around, and it has no record of it, it might make up a book and say, oh, he's published a book about like VR and education, right? Like just based on what information it has and what likely would happen. But it won't tell you, oh, like, again, they're working on safeguards so that it does do that more often, but it is still very likely to do something like that. So we definitely want to be fact checking and double checking everything we can get from AI.
Absolutely. As future teachers going into student teaching or field placements, is this something we need to be aware of, like an AI policy at the school or district that we're working at? Is this something we should be aware of? And if there isn't one, what's something, I guess that's more of a question for new beginning teachers who already are practicing. What are some ways to get started on an AI policy for your school or district?
So we have found that a lot of districts still don't have policies, and the ones that have policies have bans. And we don't think those bans are going to stick around for much longer. I think largely because the amount of like different tools that come out every day is too high for a district to keep banning. When all of your major tools that you're already using, use them. So like Google has AI integrated, Microsoft has AI integrated, like Canva has AI integrated, like banning all of these different tools that you're already using.
You named the top three.
Yeah, exactly. And so, those are three tools that teachers use daily. Students often use daily. And so finding ways to just ban the AI technology, I think, is starting to become more and more difficult for districts. And so I'm hoping that we can have more conversations that talk about what is the right way to both, prevent student plagiarism, which I know is a concern of folks. You allow ethical usage of AI by students. Also allow teachers to use AI in ways that are productive so that we free up some of their time. We can talk a little bit about that as well. But I think at the other part of this is going to be at the classroom level. And so one of our recommendations to districts has been to kind of be as hands-off as possible and give teachers guidance about different policies, because I think this will vary from classroom to classroom. And so the way that you might want to allow a first grader to use AI technology to write an essay might be very different than a 12th grader. And so a district-wide policy that says, oh, no AI technology at all is going to leave our students underserved. They won't be prepared for the real world.
Right.
They're going to have to learn how to use these technologies, but we want to make sure it's scaffolded throughout the education system. And so that's that. The hope is that we can make these decisions at more granular levels and say, okay, this class is now ready to play with this particular AI tool in this particular way. They're allowed to use it for this project, but not this project. Kind of start having those kinds of really specific policies in our classroom. And I know that's difficult. Like that's one more thing to worry about. Like there's no part of me that doesn't feel extremely terrible that I'm here saying that like there's this massive task that folks need to do now before they start teaching. And I think that that's what caused a lot of the scare last year as well, was we were in the middle of the school year and folks were just like, oh my gosh, my entire idea of what I get for homework is now completely irrelevant and I need to rethink all these things. Or my students are cheating at levels I've never seen before in my classes. And now I need to like really think about what that means. I'm hoping that we, as like, we, especially pre-service teachers, have the time right now to think about what that means for their classroom, what kind of assignments they want to craft, and what kind of policies they want to build. And we normally recommend that you kind of like create like a scale of policies and you kind of have one for each assignment. And so like a red scale policy would be one that has like, you cannot use AI for this at all. And you might want to, that might be an in-class assignment just so that you can have extra safeguards about it. To a green light policy, it says you can use it for whatever you want, as long as like, I'm going to make the project much more complicated because I know you're using AI technology. Mm-hmm. And then just tell me how you're using the AI technology so I can see how you thought about the use of AI technology. And so, and there's middle grounds here too, where, you can use it for the brainstorming and research phase, but you're going to come to class and write the essay. And those kinds of things I'm sure will keep popping up. But I think that those are decisions that I think folks are going to have to make at an individual level based on their comfort with the technology, based on their comfort explaining the technology to students. But also let's make sure that students are exposed to the technology in little ways and not just like all of it at once.
Right. Priten, we've only been recording for 20 minutes and I feel like this has been such a rich conversation. We haven't even gotten to the tools yet. This is so good. It gives the listeners such a great background about what AI is, some safeguards, things to think about ethically, along with biases, untrue information that could happen when you use AI. Let's kind of flip the mindset into from let's ban it. I mean, because that's what this story isn't new. We've watched this story before with calculators, with Google, with Wikipedia, and now it's with AI. So instead of banning it, using it for teacher good, using it for educational power for our teachers and our students. A lot of the AI tools that I'm seeing out on the market are branding themselves as tools that can help with teacher burnout. So where do you want to start? Do you want to start with tools for teachers, tools for students? You kind of lead that part.
Yeah, let's start with tools for teachers. I feel like that's always been easier for us because folks are a lot more scared about bringing something in front of students. But I think like if we can start getting folks to use it in their own spaces, like outside of the classroom, that also builds their own AI literacy that they can then use when they're bringing tools with students. So if you've never played with an AI tool before, thought about how it impacts education, having it write an email for you is definitely a great place to start. Yeah. So, and it's a very like low stakes environment to start testing these tools out. So, there's so many tools that are popping up every day. There's tools on all kinds of like education specific ones, non-education specific ones, really generalized ones that integrate with the tools you're already using. And so like the tools that are built within Canva or built within Google Docs, all those are all there. And we realize that like the amount of information coming out in the AI scene is like really overwhelming between new technologies, new capabilities, and then all the drama. Like it's just like there's so much going on constantly. And so we try to like have folks try to pick one or two things that they're going to play with and to stick to that. Like our recommendation still has been to like pick with one chatbot. We try to lean towards ChatGPT. I don't know if that will change now. I don't think it will. But so ChatGPT is our recommendation for folks who are first time interacting with AI, instead of finding a tool that does one particular niche thing. Because the best part about ChatGPT and what made it popular was it's conversational. Right. And I think folks like initially when folks spent the spring going in and playing with it, they tried something and they walked away because it wasn't exactly what they wanted. They're like, oh, it does a really bad job of this. Like, this is nowhere close. This is all hype. And I think part of the problem was that it actually does a really good job of iterating on what you tell it. And so if you asked it for a lesson plan for a 5th grade classroom on the water cycle, and it like came up with a ridiculous experiment that like involved like waiting 12 days for like the rain to fall, whatever, right? Like something ridiculous like that. You could tell it that. You could say, hey, I only have one class period to do this and I don't know the weather forecast for tomorrow. And so it would give you a better lesson plan after that. And so I think this is where when you talk about, using your like the actual knowledge about your students, knowledge about like what you know about yourself as a teacher, what pedagogical theories you like following within your classroom, right? All that information you can feed that into ChatGPT, and you can say, I like having a active learning classroom where I like, with a flipped classroom setting, my students have I have 5 ESL students in my classroom, and they tend to get bored really quickly if I'm like talking for more than 5 minutes. Can you make a lesson plan for like a 5th grade New York City science classroom to learn the water cycle? Now it has so much more information to use that to now cater that lesson plan much more closely to you. It still won't get it 100% right. It's still not you. You're still the expert, right? Where there's no question that the human intuitions at play here, it will not be able to replicate. It has not seen your students' reactions when you do certain things in the classroom. It hasn't had conversations with their parents. It hasn't tried and tested things and known that okay, no matter how cool this sounds, it never actually works in practice. But all of that kind of feedback and stuff, you can give it to kind of start getting closer to an end goal. It can get you 80 to 90% there is kind of where what we like to tell folks is, yes, you're right. You will not have a 100% ready to use thing from this. If someone took 80% of your workload off, I think you'd be really, really happy. Yeah. And that's a really good reason to at least try using these tools. The other piece, there are tools that are education specific. And so we have our own tool called pedagogue.ai, where there's tools that the teachers don't have to prompt, and we kind of do a lot of that for them. So they can go in and say that I want a worksheet based on this YouTube video, and it kind of generates the worksheet for them. So there's lots of tools like that will keep popping out. So if teachers feel like they don't want to do the whole, I don't want to have a conversation, I don't want to know which words to say, which words not to say, they can start playing around with tools like that in the meantime. I do think long-term that the right way to approach this is to use tools like ChatGPT. You'll just have a lot more flexibility there. And so if you want to be able to take the full advantage of where these tools can get you, it's best to use a chat system.
Excellent. Let's go back and talk about that lesson plan that we're popping into ChatGPT. Now, I'm sure some listeners are thinking, red flags, this is cheating. This is cheating. I'm taking something that I didn't write and I'm using it in my classroom. Now, my response to that, whenever I hear people say oh, I'm taking this, putting in my classroom, I think, well, what are you doing with TPT? Teachers pay teachers. Are you grabbing content from there and putting it in front of your students? Of course, we're looking at it before we do that. Of course, we're vetting it, and maybe we're editing it, adding a few things, taking things that maybe we didn't cover a certain part that the resource in TPT has. But what's your response to that? Oh my gosh, I'm cheating. I feel like I'm cheating the system if I use something from AI.
Right. I think this is a great opportunity to have conversations with our students. And so that's my first answer is you should tell students you use AI for it and help them learn that it's okay to use AI for things that make it more efficient so you can focus on the things that matter. And so if you have AI generate the lesson plan so that you can spend a bit more time being creative with the poster board that's actually needed for that activity, that's a great way to use AI to free up time to do your job better and to serve your students better. And having that conversation directly with students and saying, hey, we think it's great to use AI technology when you're offloading things that aren't actually helping you, aren't actually your work output at the end of the day, aren't what you want to be most proud of at the end of the day and help you get to the next level of work output. And so that, there's a little lesson for students in there in telling them that you've used AI, but also you're right that the reality is that we borrow lesson plans from other teachers all the time. We use sites where you can download lesson plans. Those have had massive copyright lawsuits against them at times because of using trademarked characters in there. So, those dangers are not unique to ChatGPT. And in fact, ChatGPT explicitly, these systems are written so that they say all output generated is your output. And so it's they consider it no different than using a Microsoft Word document that has spell check built in that does the spell checking for you. And so you would never say, oh, I used the spell checking, and so this isn't my original document. That's how they're approaching it. Yeah. And I think that we want to keep thinking about this as a tool and not a replacement. And I think that will also help the narrative a little bit.
Yeah, let's repeat that for people in the back. It's a tool, not a replacement. So it's not going to replace teachers at all. It's a tool to help supplement. So I like to think of it as the interactive whiteboard or the projector or your laptop. It's a tool that's going to help support you as an educator.
Right.
All right. So let's talk about tools for teachers. And we shared about ChatGPT and pedagogy.ai. Could you spell that out for us, for our listeners?
Yeah. So it's pedagogy.ai.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. And we'll make sure we put that in the show notes as well. But there's also tools out there for students to use. Could you share a little bit about those too?
Yeah, so student-facing tools are a little bit more complicated in my eyes. I think that the bar is really high for me to feel comfortable with a student-facing tool. And I think a lot of schools are approaching it by allowing students to interact with ChatGPT and other chatbots. And I think that's in a structured environment where you're in the classroom and kind of able to see what's going on, that might work really well. But the reality is that there's no safeguards at all. And so if you might be telling them to talk about Brown v. Board of Education, and they decide to read about Roe v. Wade, which it's just like implications for what kind of conversations are happening in the classroom, how in control you are of it, what kind of feedback you're getting from parents later on. Those kinds of things start becoming a bit more of a concern when it's such an open environment. Now, that's no different than Google. You could have told them to go do research on Google and told them to search for Brown v. Board of Education. They could be looking up Roe v. Wade, and you might still get an angry parent. But I think just like in terms of giving them a particular tool to use to have a conversation with, having a safeguarded way to use these AI tools might feel a little bit better. My two recommendations: Khanmigo has its own tool. So Khan Academy has put out a tool called Khanmigo that's catered towards students in the educational space. And it's supposed to be like a little tutor bot for them that goes along with all of the Khan Academy content. And so if you're a Khan Academy school, that's a great place to start in terms of having something that's a bit more scaffolded and controlled, where you can kind of be in control of what the students are doing. And there's a little bit more safeguards in terms of their safety. We have our own tool as well. So Socrat.ai is a tool that we've put out where teachers can assign custom things to students, and then the students can only do that with the AI bot. And so, for example, a teacher might say, you can only have a debate about climate change with Socrat, and then the student can try debating about anything else or talking or asking about anything else. And it won't do that. It will only debate about climate change with the student. Teachers have live transcripts of every conversation the students are having, so you're not like having to guess, and students can't like have one chat, delete it, and then start a new one, which is another problem with ChatGPT is even if you ask them for a transcript of their ChatGPT conversation, they could have had 10 chats first and then give you the last one. So we prevent all of that with our bot. And these are two that come to mind right now. And I think there are two that I've seen that kind of do what I think is necessary in the educational space. But I'm sure the amount of innovation that's happening in the space is so rapid that I think by the end of the school year, we might see a few more student-facing tools that are robust. Quizlet has its own set of tools that go along with their platform. And so they have like a chatbot that will do vocabulary tests and quizzes back and forth based on their flashcards. Those kinds of educational tools I feel much more comfortable with because there's very limited scope as to how the students can interact with it. And they're built for the educational space. And I think that's something that I think I would want to like keep encouraging teachers to when they're having students interact directly with these AI tools. Whatever is made for the educational space is lifetimes better than anything that's made for the general audience.
Right. I mean, you listed three great ones there that we can check out for our students. And I like how you said it's kind of like they're kind of boxed in. They can't really go outside those parameters based on the tools that they're going to be using. And I'll make sure I pop the show notes, the links in the show notes to those resources. Now, Priten, we'd be remiss if we didn't share about your book and your work. So you have a book, you have a course, and you have an audiobook coming out as well about AI in the future of education. Can you please share a little bit more about your work, where we can find you and connect with you?
Yeah, so my work has been at the intersection of education and technology for the last decade. And last fall, we got a lot of people reaching out and saying, I'm really scared about this. I'm really scared about this. These were a lot of clients that we had worked with during the COVID-19 pandemic to do a lot of the online learning transition. And I was caught off guard a little bit because I've been playing around with this technology since college in terms of like productive uses of the technology. And so I had played with a language learning tool that used AI back in my like first intro computer science class. We've been talking with a client about potentially using it for a reasoning project. And when the like new GPT technologies came out, I was like, oh, like this is a great way for students to have Socratic dialogues. And that's how like Socrat.ai came about. That was my philosophy background, shining a little too hot over there. And everyone came in and was like, no, like we don't want to use this technology. We want to figure out how to get around it or like prevent our students from using it. And so, when Wiley reached out and they were like, hey, like we need a book about AI for teachers because they're getting similar requests about like how do we navigate the scene. And this was a great companionship. So we kind of worked really quickly to put together a book in probably one of the shortest professionally published books in history. It was like a good, really quick turnaround time there. They worked really quickly to get this out for teachers in terms of the new school year. And so I'm really grateful for their team. And the book kind of goes through and talks about everything. It gives you the background about AI. There's some bigger picture questions about what this means for our educational system, what it means for how we teach and what we teach, what the workforce might look like in 10 years or 5 years, and what that might mean for how we approach education. It's very exciting. But the book also like tries to ground folks and say like the values and goals that we have as teachers have not changed changed. Like all of those things will remain true, even if AI becomes the most powerful things that we'll see. And it's really a matter of like how we refocus like exactly what's happening on a daily basis. But the big picture about like why you're going into teaching, what you want for your students, and even like the pedagogical theories that you find most interesting and effective, those can all remain true in a world with AI. And so the amount of fear that I think we're seeing, I think hopefully the book does a little bit of quelling of that apprehension. And then it gives lots of practical tools and tips. And so the book is not like, it doesn't focus just on ChatGPT or just on one particular tool, because who knows what tool will be around in 6 months. And that was not something we wanted to kind of the book to be a little bit more timeless. So all the advice in the book can kind of be incorporated with whatever the newest, latest AI technology is. There's lots of practical examples of how you can use it as a teacher for your workflow, whether it be lesson planning, whether it be coming up with a permission slip. There's ideas for how you can use it to increase student engagement. And then there's some examples of how you can even use it for your own professional development. And so the book really does try to give a very comprehensive overview of like everything you probably need to know right now in order to make sense of it and be ready for the next stage of whatever gets thrown at all of us in the next like few months. And so there's a three graduate course credit course that's like a comprehensive understanding of AI and education at a larger level. So there's some more theoretical stuff in there. There's capstone projects that really help you rethink what a curriculum might look like in a world of AI. And then we have one that's much more crash coursey for somebody who's about to like be in the classroom really, really quick and just wants to know exactly what they need to know and not do not too much theorizing and just kind of like, okay, here are the practicals that I need for tomorrow morning, basically. Mm-hmm. And so those two companion courses are also on that same website where our tools are. We also publish so much content like for free constantly on our Instagram, on our blogs. We have like a lesson plan library where we have suggestions for how teachers can integrate AI within like particular classrooms. And so there's like AI lesson plans for a history classroom and AI lesson plans for teaching about AI in a history classroom. And that kind of content's constantly being posted. And that's all free with an account on the site. And then we have a prompt library of like 600 and something prompts that teachers can just copy and paste and put into something. And all of that is available for free with an account on the website. And our Instagram, our social media person is one of my favorite people ever. She is really on top of making sure that the latest updates are posted in a way that's contextualized to teachers. So we kind of filter through some of that news for folks so that you're not like trying to keep up with the New York Times and like the Atlantic on like every single thought piece that comes out about AI. So she just filters through a lot of it, kind of gives you the key updates that you need to know as a teacher. And then lots of suggestions again for like which tools to use, how to use these tools, some creative ideas for using these tools. All of that gets posted to our Instagram, which is Pedagogy Cloud. All this is linked from that pedagogue.ai website, which is probably like, if you go to that homepage, you'll find everything else from there. And I'll share those links with you as well. But we really want to be like a one-stop place for teachers to navigate all parts of AI. So there's lots of companies that do one or two of these things. We really want to offer like a comprehensive set of options for teachers that kind of do all of it. So they can kind of, figure out what they want to do, use the lesson plan in the classroom, figure out which bot to use, all those kinds of things, all from one place.
Wow, this is so good. It's such a rich resource too. It's not just here's the tool or the tools that we offer, but here is content that is filtered out that I can read as a teacher and know how it's going to implement my practice. Here are resources that I could use. Here are ideas that I can use in my classroom space. So it is phenomenal. Thank you so much, Priten and team, for creating an amazing resource for future teachers and practicing educators. Thank you so much. That's so awesome.
Yeah. So it's a pleasure to have this conversation. I really hope that folks can kind of like feel a little bit less scared and a little bit more prepared. Yeah. A deep breath at this point, I'm hoping is what's happening across the audience.
Absolutely. And I think they're going to have to rewind this episode a few times because there were so many good things dropped in this episode, Priten. Thank you so much for your time today. And I'm really excited to hear from our listeners about what they think about AI and some ideas for their own classroom use.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the EduMagic New Educator podcast. If you found it helpful, please leave a rating and review or share it with a friend. Always remember, you have the EduMagic in you.